I think it's really important for us as humans to understand what our values are and what they mean to us, because that kind of drives us, what we feel inside. And if we are acting in, contradiction to our values, that creates a sense of conflict inside ourselves that we might not recognize.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident. Good day, and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Ray Hartjen. Ray is a writer, musician, marketer, and cancer patient advocate living in Southern California. Throughout his professional career spanning 5 decades, Ray has pivoted on many occasions, from investing banking to pharmaceuticals, from consumer electronics to SaaS software. However, one constant throughout his career and life has been his deep passion for storytelling. Ray has often been sought out for his insights by national media, particularly concerning the consumer electronics and retail industries. He's also contributed to several online outlets and platforms, including his personal website, where he shares his views on a wide range of topics, primarily writing, cancer, sports, and business, particularly revenue team functions like sales and marketing. Ray is the author of 3 published books. Currently, we're lucky enough that Ray is actually releasing a book on the 6th of May, when this podcast is going to be available for you to listen to as well. Congratulations, Ray. We'll talk more about that in a moment on your 4th book. So the first book is Immaculate: How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. Then there's Me, Myself, and Multiple Myeloma, and Revenue Orchestration, and Today's New Era of B2B Sales and Marketing. His 4th book, again being released today, is the Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. Look forward to catching some of these books, especially your book on multiple myeloma. So with the soundtrack of life playing continuously in his head, Ray finds catharsis performing and recording with his 2-piece acoustic band, the Chronic Padres. He resides in California, where he and his wife Lori live with their golden doodle Quinn. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Ray. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
It's my pleasure, Dwight. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate you and appreciate this opportunity. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I look forward to our very detailed and up and down conversation. Isn't that the best conversation, right? Where it's not just monotone, it's got some variance to it, like a volume up and down, right?
Sure, so little back and forth, question answer, the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not linear. It's just gonna, or maybe it will be. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think so. I think it's gonna have some ups and downs, some twists and turns, lefts and rights. So yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Right on. That's fantastic. So Ray, like I talked to you before we hit record, I like focusing on the origin story. It helps people connect with you. It helps us continue to develop a relationship of know, like, and trust. And that vulnerability is always appreciated, more so than people realize that are guests on my show. For the person that's listening, your words, they can be hanging on, right? Oh, I have a similarity to Ray, or, oh, wow, I never thought about that. My childhood did impact me that way. Again, it can be good, bad, ugly. I've had people that have great childhood, but there were still things that they wish they were great, but yet they were put inside of they're pigeonholed, right? They weren't really allowed to grow because life was great, but it wasn't developmental, if that makes sense. So, Ray, please tell me your origin stories and the key things in your life that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked that, and not just of me, Dwight, but of all your guests. For me, I always, I lived a big chunk of my life for a long period of time thinking I was just kind of like a normal guy, on the bell-shaped curve. I was right there with it like everybody else. But as I got older, I realized that that wasn't the case at all. And I'll give you some examples. Growing up, we weren't rich. My father was a career military officer in the United States. So we were, middle class. But I had both my parents in my house. Again, I don't think that's necessarily normal, right? I didn't have to worry about. I didn't have food insecurity. I didn't have to worry about a place to live. My parents, our entire family valued education, right? And there wasn't ever any question that I was going to go to college, and I didn't have to worry about paying for college, right? And while growing up, I kind of thought, well, that's just like everybody. As I got older, I realized that's not the case at all. There's a lot of people that grow up without both parents in their house, that grow up with a great deal of food insecurity or roof over their head insecurity, that don't know how they're going to pursue an advanced education and the like. And so I feel, at the time, I didn't even have the really kind of the gratitude for it, because I was living in my little bubble, and I just kind of thought, this is kind of like everybody did. And as I got older and I began to, gain some more life experiences, I realized maybe I wasn't, the typical and the average person that I kind of thought it was. That, I had a great deal of, I wouldn't say it's a head start, but I had a lot of things kind of going in my way, right? I think, for like the first 54 years of my life, I lived, and I think that it draws me with, so much interest to your podcast and Give a Heck is, I was kind of like on the hamster wheel of life, and a treadmill is like what I think of it, just one step in front of the other. And, Monday was an awful lot like Tuesday, and Tuesday was a lot like Wednesday. And the days go by, the weeks go by, the years go by, even though I had a lot of changes in my career. And it all kind of, the crux of my origin story was, March 11th, 2019, 19 days before my 55th birthday. That's when I was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. And it's something I know that you're very familiar with in your personal life, the dear friend of yours, a close friend of yours, having succumbed in a battle with multiple myeloma. And, multiple myeloma is an incurable cancer, Dwight, as you know, but it's treatable, right? And so I started treatment there, and it was so many people helped me when I first, began to have treatment. And I faced that challenge and that obstacle with a little bit of maybe a different approach. I kind of wanted to learn more about me, kind of, as a person, and I began to approach, what I was experiencing and the disease and being a cancer patient and the whole cancer community, caregivers and allies and the like, with a growth mindset and a beginner's type of attitude. And so, Dwight, remember when we were kids, we would just go outside with we didn't know anything, because we hadn't learned it, we hadn't experienced it. And we just had this curiosity about stuff. We didn't go out every day and, with the intention of learning. We would just discover by doing, running around outside during the summer and, like, hey, look, there's a praying mantis or whatever. And, checking out this bug and, that sense of discovery and exploration and learning, after a while, I think for most humans, it kind of goes away. Right. We become teenagers and we know everything, for those in the audience who are listening instead of watching, I just did little air quotes with my fingers. We know everything. I'm 16 years old. What can you teach me? And we kind of forget that. And, for me, a big moment was just a couple of weeks after my diagnosis with multiple myeloma. I'm sitting in a restaurant, a P.F. Chang's restaurant, if I recall correctly, with my wife and one of our children, our son Raymond. And I was just exhausted. I like everything I do. I was attacking being a cancer patient with everything I had. What can I control? I can control my medicines. I can go to the doctor. I can work out and prepare myself to, receive treatment. I can get ready for a stem cell transplant. All these things. And after about 11 days, it was on a Friday night, I was sitting there and I couldn't even read the menu. I was exhausted. And I very quickly realized that, I had approached just the way I'd always approached everything in my life, Dwight, where, athletically, it was always like a game or a race or an event. Musically, it was always like a gig or something. Professionally, it was delivering something. So always a capstone event that would just like knock off, academically, it was an exam or what have you. There's always a thing, and I was approaching my fight with cancer, an incurable cancer, that same way, like a fight night, game day type of situation. And it dawned on me there. It's like, wow, it's, you have a chronic illness, every day is game day. Every night is fight night. And I needed to kind of change my approach. And that's when I kind of woke up to the fact that my whole being is more than just my physical being. There's my mental component, the emotional component, my spiritual component. And being a musician, what I drew the analogy to a mixing board where you can, raise the level of drums or, lower, me being a guitar player, let's always get more guitar. Let's always get more guitar. Right. And so, I recognized the fact that, I could have a strength in one area that can pull up these factors of my whole being, if it need be. But at the same time, maybe one of those factors of my entire being, my whole being, might drag down one of my other strengths, and I needed to approach, my fight with cancer in a more sustainable manner. And look at my entire being, my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And that kind of realization and being able to articulate it in my head, Dwight, was really the beginning of changing my life and living my life with more purpose, more intent. And we're going to definitely get into that conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I like that though. Like, you're right. When we're younger, our realization or our awareness is very very concise to our surroundings of our parents, our extracurricular things, our schools, and we only see really what we want to see. We become, even at a young age, it's not confirmation bias because we're not necessarily reading about it or listening to it, but we're seeing, and we assume that person has both parents together. We assume they have lots of food. We assume they're going to get their schooling paid for because we live in that little bubble, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's the same as myself. I didn't realize how many people were suffering. I grew up in a small farming community. I didn't grow up in Edmonton. I grew up in a farming community of approximately 10,000 people. My dad's one of 18 kids. My mom's one of 9. Lots of farmers, lots of preconceived things of what I believed everybody had.
Yeah.
And then you get older and you realize, oh my gosh, what do you mean you're not going to college, university? Well, couldn't even get a student loan. We couldn't get this processed or whatever the case may be. I know I got to stay home because my mom and dad need me to work this part-time or full-time to help with the bills, so I can't go to school. And started hearing these stories as I got older, especially when I got into my finance industry, which wasn't until my 30s. I realized how unique and different we all are, just like our fingerprints.
Yeah.
And we have to stop making assumptions about other people. We have to open our eyes up and have more gratefulness and gratitude and appreciation, which we'll talk about too. So I liked you talking about the fact that, you had no food insecurity, family valued education, right? Just stuff like that. And then we get all the way up to where you get diagnosed with multiple myeloma and the shift of your thought processes. But really, were those thought processes, when you look back at it, when you were diagnosed, was it something that was in you already to continue to drive to be the best? Like you talked a little bit about that. Was your mindset always something where you attacked everything, no matter what it was, it's just more intense because now it's an incurable disease?
It's an interesting question. I've been asked a lot of times. A good friend of mine, a biotech executive, he loves to ask a question of interviewees for positions. What describes you most? As someone who do you like to win or do you hate to lose? And that competitiveness factor. And for me, it's very contingent. I like to win the things that are important. I'm competitive on the things that are important to me. Like in business, the race for the customer. There's only one victory. one winner, and second place in the race for the customer is really first loser. So that's important. You need to win the customer. But then, if I'm playing Monopoly with my daughter and my son-in-law, I don't really care who wins. It's about playing Monopoly with I like to win if I could, but if one of them should win, at least I got to spend a couple hours playing Monopoly with them or whatever. And that, those are the rewarding things. So yeah, I attacked some things. I always have attacked some things in my life with this like laser focus, got to win. This is important. And then other things, it's, more of the experience. I'm winning in different ways. I don't need to win. It's just the participation of that kind of comes about. But with my growth mindset, adopting the growth mindset, which I have to remind myself to do every day, Dwight, because it's so easy to fall back into our what we think we know, and there's so many opportunities to learn new things, to unlearn old things, and the like. For years, I used to facilitate a time management course from Franklin Covey, various names, what matters most, and things like that. But there was an exercise in there that I wanted to revisit soon after my diagnosis. Once I began this, kind of this sense of discovering who I am. And it's a timeline exercise, Dwight, and audience members, just follow along with me. You don't need a pencil and a piece of paper. If you have one, this is the opportune time to use it. If you don't, you can do this mentally in your head. You just take your pencil or in your mind, just draw a line left to right horizontally, and on the far left-hand side, you make a little vertical tick mark. Far right-hand side, make it a little vertical tick mark. So the left-hand side, you put a B underneath that vertical tick mark, and that's going to represent your birth. You guys are already way too smart for me and you're ahead of me. You know what the right-hand tick mark is. You're going to put a little D there, and that represents your death. That's your timeline. So in facilitating this time management course, Dwight, I would always just kind of like throw my tick mark right in the middle. This is where I am right now. I'm right in the middle. I'm going to live to be at least 100. And shoot, I'm going to live forever, Dwight. And so that's the introspective part. Audience members, if you can just take a moment and kind of think, where am I on my timeline? I know we know that tomorrow's not promised and so forth. But, where do you believe you are? Where do you feel you are? Right. So like I said, Dwight, I was always right in the middle. And then when I was diagnosed with an incurable blood cancer, I needed to articulate to myself, I am probably much further to the right than I thought I was, but what does that mean? What it means, once I got, time to think about that is that, what, like a lot of human beings, I think I've been guilty of taking time for granted. And I've, depending on I took all tomorrows for granted, Dwight. And then next week's, next month, next year, and depending on the topic, it could be decades. It's that age-old story. Someday, I am going to ... right? But then I wanted to think about that more. Okay, so you take time for granted. How does it really manifest itself in your life? Well, maybe there's some things I procrastinated about, but what it really impacts my life is that by taking time for granted, I also took people and relationships for granted. I've got a good friend, Dwight, in Edmonton. Thinking about him, should reach out, but he's going to be there tomorrow, and I'll be here tomorrow. So I'll just wait until tomorrow. And sometimes those days would go for weeks and for months, for years, without connecting with the people that meant most to me. Right. So a big learning experience for me early in my journey with cancer was, understanding this, understanding in my head, being able to articulate in my head what had been taking time for granted, how that had manifested itself in my life, and it wasn't very positive. Right. These are poor things. I was taking time for granted. I was taking people and relationships for granted. So I wanted to change that. And, being a musician, having gigs, you're always looking for ways to make more money. And one of the ways we like to do is make up t-shirts, put a little saying on the back of it. If you can sell a t-shirt for $20, that's great. So it turned into a motto. And the first motto was, if not now, when? By looking at my timeline, it's finite. If not now, when? What are the things I want to do? And, one, tangible story is the first book. You mentioned it in the intro, Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. I am not a Yinzer. For those of you out there aren't familiar with the word, a Yinzer is a person from Pittsburgh. But a dear friend of mine, Tom Olenek, is a Yinzer. And, he's my age. He's in his 60s now as well. And when he was growing up, Pittsburgh had to suffer through a deindustrialization transformation. It was very, very painful. But yet they came out of that deindustrialization transformation smelling like a rose. They are considered a new economy success story. They're world renowned for academia, medical research, technology, and the like. They've really transitioned well. Where in the United States, we have this Rust Belt, and the Rust Belt cousins of Pittsburgh, Detroit, Akron, Cleveland, Buffalo, they're still struggling in moving from an industrialized type of a city into a new economy type of city. Getting to a shorter story from this long story, Tom, for decades, had this thesis that the reason that Pittsburgh kind of went through their deindustrialization transformation relatively smoothly compared to the Rust Belt cousins is that when they needed their heroes the most, they found them in a rather unexpected place, and that was with the professional football team, who up until 1972 had not been very good. The first 39 years they'd been mediocre at best, kind of horrible, so when they needed their heroes, the Steelers were there for them. The Steelers were built kind of like in a mirror image of them: hard scrabble, blue collar, bring your lunch pail to work, take a shower after work, not before work types of people, which were the people of Pittsburgh. But Tom talked about this book for 20 years. Heck, he talked to me about it for 10 years. It would make a great book one day. We should write a book, blah, blah, blah. One day, Dwight, I just grabbed him by the shoulders and I said, if not now, when? I mean, come on, we're talking about things that happened nearly 50 years ago. Let's get started. If we should ever veer from your vision, well, of course, correct. So next thing you know, the book comes out. We never had to, we didn't stray from vision. 18 months later, the book was done. And that was the first book. So, if not now, when led to that. And if not now, when has kind of, for me, it's morphed into another motto, and that's punch today in the face. And we've talked about this, before, Dwight, today is a gift. And not everybody received that gift today, but we got that gift. So how can we honor the people that didn't receive today as a gift? How can we honor them? How can we honor ourselves? And how can we honor the day? And that is to make the most of it, and personifying the day. I want to grab today's attention. I want today to know that I was here. I want to go to bed at night thinking I used up today for all it was worth. And I have a sense of peace and inner peace and self-satisfaction, and how can I grab today's attention and let it, today know that I was here? Well, if you've ever been punched in the face, that kind of grabs your attention pretty quick. So it's something for me that motivates me. I have friends that say, can you just hug today instead? Whatever motivates you to make the most of the day. If you want to give today a hug, great. If you want to punch today in the face, that's also great. Just take advantage of the gift that today is and make the most of it. So, again, that kind of ties back to that timeline exercise that really helped me reframe, what I do. Now I try to concentrate my days on doing what's most important for me, the things I want to get accomplished with the people I love and respect the most.
No, that's fantastic. So many things that you talked about that resonate with me. And I look at the fact you talked about time for granted, your people relationships. We all do that. Why do we have to have something shocking happen in our lives before we realize how important the things are around us? I've had to develop certain things like my core values. I've gotten more deeper into them over the last, let's say, decade, and realizing that. So you have, if not now, when, punch today in the face, whatever. I have certain things that I look at and think to myself, am I taking this for granted? Because I've had people like my friend that passed away from multiple myeloma. I haven't talked about it on the show before. So for those listening or watching, I can relate. And part of what Ray talked about is my connection of wanting Ray on the show was a large part because I had one of my closest, dearest friends pass away from that disease. And he didn't have those aha moments as much as you're talking about. He literally was a personal development guy. Both of us were. I just took it more serious. And what am I saying that for? People listening or watching, you can be superficial when it comes to things. You can say things, you can, project things to people, but are you actually taking action? Are you actually doing something? So for you to take action and upon the realization of where your life was at and advance and through your thought process, not everybody does that. That's another thing you need to pat yourself on the back for. And I'll pat yourself on from here, virtually, because some people don't. They get terrible news, tragedies that happen in their lives, and one of two things happen. You're either going to climb from that, you're going to learn from that, or you're going to what? You're going to camp. You're going to live in the valley of despair. And I've seen that with my friend. And I think part of his thought process, he felt robbed. He was 62. He never even made it to his retirement. And just the things that I've seen and watched him go through, and he felt a lot of regret and remorse. How many of us are going to feel that way? Regret and remorse, not for the fact of we are knowing when our day is going to be coming up soon. What about those around you? Do you have parents still alive? I'm blessed to have both my parents in their 80s still alive. Am I taking their relationship for granted? Like you talked, that timeline. Am I spending enough time? I think to myself, when people laugh at me, Ray, I'll say, think about how often did you see your sister last year, your best friend, your parents? Well, 3 times. How old are they? How many more? Let's say they live 10 years and you see them 30 more times. Is that a guarantee? No. So every time you go see them out of that 3 times, be engaged.
Yeah.
That time is precious. Life is in session. This is not a dress rehearsal. Really take for granted and take stock. Now, if you can learn from Ray's story and my interjections within that and my own experiences, and it stops that slide in your life for not having time appreciation, fantastic. Because again, like Ray said, we got to live today to the best and have gratefulness and gratitude. And I know every day I do. I literally have to. I have it when I get up. I have it when I went to bed. I even thought about it in my thought process and gratefulness. I thought today is going to be a great day. I'm going to have a podcast. I'm going to have this go on. I'm going to have this go on with my one adult son. I'm going to have this go on, and I'm going to live the day as it rolls out, as it falls in front of me, and challenges that come up. I'm going to have a character building moment, possibly. I know how to deal with those, but this is all stuff that we have to practice and work on. I don't have bad days. I just don't. I refuse to have bad days because I've had so many good people like Lyle that passed away. I've had friends die from suicide. I've had family die from suicide. I've had people that didn't have that hope. You need to instill hope in yourself, don't you? Right? Doesn't a person have to instill hope in themselves by their associations of what they read, what they watch, who they talk to, who they hang out with? You can't be grateful if you constantly got noise and crap coming in.
It's a good question that you pose. I think that it's important to choose and choose your attitude. And the answer is always right. You audience members listening in and watching, what's right for you might be different than what's right for somebody else. Quite frequently it is, right? So there is something that is right for you. There is this choice. But I also think, Dwight, it's incumbent also for us to recognize signs of need in others, right? They might not recognize that they need a little help, but you recognize they need a little help. And sometimes those conversations can be incredibly difficult. But I also like to, it's something I approach in the book. Me, myself, on my multiple myeloma is this, I've had cancer patients in groups say you learn who your friends are pretty quickly, and they're kind of within their own bubble here again, and they've had a traumatic thing happen to their life. They've been diagnosed with cancer, right? And they have certain expectations on their community, but at the same time, you're not giving. I hope I never, ever say that about myself. You know who your friends are. You find out who your friends are really fast, because I don't know what's going on in their world necessarily. And a lot of times it's because of me. A lot of times we don't know what to say. We don't know how to have these difficult conversations. And so if someone's not asking me about my health, I don't assume that, well, they're not friends of mine anymore. The thing I do assume is that they've got stuff going on in their life. And also maybe they don't know what to say to me, and I think back to being a younger person, I would never ask anybody if they were expecting a child, if they were pregnant, because I've seen somebody ask somebody, well, when are you expecting? And they weren't expecting. and it was super awkward. And
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to be in an awkward situation. So you know what? I would never ask anybody, even if they were obviously pregnant. I would never say anything until they had a baby in their hand. And another example is, I asked a good friend of mine from college once. I was at a party, and it's like, where's your husband, Tracy? And she just looks at me and smiles and says, not here. Clearly, we're not a couple anymore, or in the process of not becoming a couple anymore. And I felt horrible. I didn't know what to say. So you know what? I stopped asking people about their significant others. It's like, let me, I'll have Therese bring up Tracy. And if she brings up Tracy, then I'll ask about Tracy. But if Therese doesn't bring up Tracy, then I'm not going to bring it up because I don't see him here, which is a silly way to approach life. You're not having these really meaningful conversations because you're afraid of maybe having an awkward conversation. So I'd like to tell people, it's like, man, if you don't know what to say, if I don't know what to say to my dear friend Dwight, start there, man. Just say, hey, Dwight, I love you. I care for you. I want the best for you. I don't really know what to say though. Can you help me work through this difficult conversation for like 30 seconds so we can get into something a bit more productive? How can I be here for you in your time of need? And that's what it takes to communicate. Sometimes it's just reaching out and saying, I don't know what to say, but I know that I'm not going to let that get in the way of us furthering our relationship because I care about you too much. So help me out, and I like to tell cancer patients that, friends are your friends. They're in your life for a reason. Like, just because they haven't reached out to you or something, they just might not know what to say. And communication is a two-way street. You gotta share with them. As you and I communicate, Dwight. You talked about core values. In a minute, I'm going to ask you, what are your core values? Because I know my core values. I just want to see where they match up. But you're a separate person, and you have this reservoir of knowledge, skills, experience, and values. And that frames what you do, like how you communicate and how you interpret things. Likewise, I have that same type of reservoir of knowledge, skills, experience, and values. So as I'm trying to code a message for you, I got something rattling around up inside my head, but I'm like, how am I going to actually communicate it verbally and non-verbally to Dwight? And so I will go through my knowledge, skills, experience, and values. And this is what I'm trying to get across. And I'll send it across to you. That makes perfect sense to me, but now you have to decode my transmission, right? You have to, based on your knowledge, skills, experiences, and values, what does all that mean? And then then you try to get meaning from it, and then you're trying to communicate back to me. If we as people just recognize that we all have different reservoirs of knowledge, skills, experience, and values, they might not be similar. They might be very
well
different.
And sometimes we shouldn't say
work our way through it.
I always tell people, like, if you're thinking of saying something, does it serve the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation yesterday with somebody. I got back home and I realized that conversation I didn't put through my filters. It didn't serve them. It didn't serve me. It was more gossipy, even though they might not have thought so. And I thought to myself, I got to analyze every time I talk, even at my age, I always got to be present in the conversation. What I'm saying, does it serve them? Is it going to make them better? Is it going to make them, am I reading their body language initially before I even have any form of conversation? Do they look tense? Maybe it should be something where if they're angry, or I'm upset, I got something going on. Hey, you know what? Can we have this conversation later? Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to say something that's inappropriate, or like you said, don't touch those sensitive topics, like are you pregnant, and find out they're not. There's so many different ways that we can stop from this phrase that it's better to be thought an idiot than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? And that's something I've driven my life by. I'd rather be thought as, oh, he doesn't converse very much, then, oh, he just pukes and says too much and he doesn't care about what other people think. And he may have been focused on this one person, but he's so blindsided, or she's so blindsided, there's people in the group standing around that you're triggering. You're not triggering that person, but you're not looking at the overall perspective.
Yeah.
Now it's not just a one-on-one. Are you watching your words? Are you being a wordsmith? Are you understanding what is being said is affecting more than just, so I look at that, who's around me when I'm on stage talking. Do I know the demographics specifically, what's sitting there? No. So you have to massage words to get across the same point, the same message. Just puking on people doesn't help them. It doesn't serve. It's back to that better to be thought an idiot than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? So I constantly work at being a wordsmith, communicating with people, evolving who I am, keeping myself at an even keel. I'm not afraid to time myself out. I'm not afraid to walk away from conversations and tell people, you know what, I'm just not feeling this. I know it needs to be talked about. And people say, well, how long have you been doing that? Since my kids were little. What do you mean? My kids would come talk to me and I'd say, you know what? You seem really upset. Dad's got to do this. I got to do that. I got to get this person off in the next 20 minutes, half hour. Is it really important that we address it right now? Is it something that we can delay after? Right? Giving them the opportunity to be young adults or whatever you want to call it, giving them control of their life somewhat. Was I perfect? No. I made mistakes. I'd snap at
Sure.
my kids, but then I'd have the courage to go up and say, and knock, knock. Yeah, open the door. Hey, I'm sorry about before.
Yeah.
Dad was a little bit uptight. Shouldn't have taken it out on you, deflected on you. I apologize. Can we talk now? I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. But as they got older, they started learning body language and knowing, hey, I can see dad's tense. Let's not bring this, it's not bring it up right now. So I train them, learn behavior, whether it was good or bad. They started learning and they do the same thing now. Most of them do the same thing as adults now. They're all adults. They look at the circumstances, they read the room, they read the person, and most importantly, the number one person you need to read, selves. For
Yeah.
those listening, I'm pointing at myself. We have to listen to ourselves. If we're not the ultimate version of ourselves and work on ourselves, like you said, constantly to stay at a even keel, it's easy to destroy others around us, and we're one of the casualties as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
So much what I think, we're discussing, kind of falls back onto our value system, and I kind of gave a little preview to that just a moment ago. It's, for me, my values, I've taken the time to identify my values, and they've been unchanged for about 25 years now. It's family, friends, fun, fitness, education, and challenge. Those are my values, and I define them probably different than a lot of other people might define them. But you talked about just having really like a value conflict. If family truly is a value, and then you snap at your case, you got some other things going on, it doesn't make you feel well, because you are in conflict with your values. You might not understand it intellectually, you haven't articulated it in your head yet, but it's like, man, who do I love more than my kids? Nobody. But then it's like recognizing the fact that I don't feel good about our last interaction, because it was contra to what I value most. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, I want to apologize for, our last interaction didn't want to go the way I do it, and I think it's really important for us as humans to understand what our values are and what they mean to us, because that kind of drives this, what we feel inside. And if we are acting in, contradiction to our values, that creates a sense of conflict inside ourselves that we might not recognize. So I know, Dwight, you have your values. What are your core values?
there are three. They've been the same three for just about 20 years. And then there's subcategories. It sounds kind of weird. My three main categories, because a lot of our core values can tie together: faith, family, and work, in that order. My faith is so important to me and helped me through the most difficult times in my life. Faith in myself, faith in others around me, faith in my faith, which is Christianity, right? Catholic Christian, is so important to me. If I don't have that solid, I'm all discombobulated and all over. I look back on my life and I reflect at certain times, raising my kids as a single dad, just all the different trials and tribulations of my business, the career, right, as a serial entrepreneur. And I think to myself, my faith gives me that hope. It gives me that solace. It gives me that anchor. Then family. If my faith is solid, my family is always going to win,
Yeah.
because I'm going to be working and on my best version of me. I'm going to be, they say something that I don't take it personal. If it's not, and if it is personal, I'm still able to keep myself at an even keel, that I can have a conversation or say, oh, I see you're very upset. I'm sorry that I had a part of that. Or, oh, I hear you're upset. I'm sorry you're going through this at work. And knowing when to talk, knowing when to give advice, knowing when to just listen, and not being afraid to ask. So, Ray, you're talking to me about stuff. Sorry, I'll let you continue on in a second. Is this just a listening session, a venting session, or do you want me to add advice?
Yeah.
Having respect enough to ask somebody, and that's a tough thing for me. I just want to help. I'm a fixer, man.
Yeah.
I just want
Sure.
to fix. It's like, your family, I want to fix it. And then I take that to my clients. Oh, you're my clients. I love you. You're my extended family. I want to fix it,
Mm.
right? But family is so important to me. I have to have my faith grounding me to help and serve my family. And at the end of the day, I grew up with a father, love him to pieces, which was one of 18 kids and he's still alive. Work, 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 work. Score values because depression and all the things they dealt with, feeding the family, hard work. And he felt his love for the family was work more, work more. Let's work 18-hour days. Wife
Yeah.
can raise the kids. Love my dad, learned a tons from him. But work is my last. I've given up opportunities. I had joint custody of my kids. Eventually, I went back to court in 2008 and got full custody of the kids. And I've had to work at things. I had to give up an opportunity to be involved in the head of a brokerage where I'd be making $5 to $6 million a year right now. I gave that up to raise my kids full time because my business is built a lot at nights, weekends. Well, guess what kids are doing in the evenings and weekends? Soccer, gym, right? Cheerleading, extracurricular, softball, whatever, swimming, everything, all the different things. And I was the mainstay of my kids. And I sacrificed and walked away from an opportunity the year before, knowing full well that things were falling apart, that I needed to start progressing myself and educating myself enough on taking over this circumstance, knowing full well I'm going to go from a nice six-figure income that I was currently making down to barely surviving for many years because I couldn't work enough.
Yeah.
But my core values kept me centered. I prayed. I had gratefulness. I kept on working at it. Did I have my nights of quiet desperation? Absolutely. I talk about it in my book.
Mm.
Having that mask on and pretending with my kids that I wasn't hurting, that I wasn't alone, even though I had people around me. We can be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually alone. We feel alone. And those core values have served me. And then I have things that offshoot with family and connection and time spent and different things like that. But those three core values have pretty much served me. Have they served me perfectly? Probably not. I could probably throw a couple extra in there, but I know people that have 8, 10, 12 core values, and they're much more specific than but mine work. I'm not
Yeah.
going to, right? They keep
And
me grounded.
it's recognizing, if you're out there in the audience and you haven't identified your core values, it's not it's not an aspirational thing. I mean, they are who you are. You have to kind of like recognize what those values are, and you can change them over time. And, and there's, you might notice for me, work is not one of my values. But I tell people, yes, it is. If you paid attention, it was, family, friends, fun, fitness, education, and challenge. But when I have a working situation that I enjoy, I want my teammates to be kind of like family and friends to me. Right. I want to learn in that. I want to be educated in my job. I want to be challenged in my job. All those values that I have, my core values, fit into whether it's a good working relationship and a good working position or not. I cannot work and I will not be happy. I will have conflict in my heart and I will have trouble getting to sleep tonight if I was working at a place that, I did not like the people I was working with. I wasn't learning things and I wasn't challenging. I need that part. So, if you audience members, if you haven't identified your core values, there's a lot of exercises you can go through online. Just do a Google search on, identifying your core values and, work your way through the exercises and find out what your core values are. And then, as you live to your values, that's when you have that peace of mind and that sense of self-satisfaction. You don't have that conflict. When you act and you behave and you think contra to your values, that's when we create this conflict for ourselves that gets us kind of wrapped up, and we kind of go in these, these circles where we're not happy, and you're not happy. You're typically not very productive, and there's things that you feel as though you're missing out on. And you had talked earlier, Dwight, today about senses of regret. It's like, you don't want to be lying on your deathbed going, oh man, I wish I had done this. That's as part of your learning process, everybody out there, identify those values, and then take a good hard think on them frequently, revisit them. It's like, am I living to my value? And if I'm not, could that be the cause of internal turmoil in my head?
And how do our values tie to one another? Like, when I talk about work and you talk about challenge, same thing. Your core values are what they need to be for you, and your interpretation of how they fit in your life have to be true to you. So I look at my work circumstances, and I told you about, embracing my clients as my family and stuff. I honestly believe that. I believe that because I've been invited to weddings. I've been invited to clients' birthday parties. The list goes on because we create a connection. But when I talk about work, it ties to faith. My faith will tell me, based on, the 10 Commandments, for an example, whether you're spiritual, whether you're somebody that worships trees, whatever, there's a lot of good value within the 10 Commandments, right? Maybe thou shalt not love God above, thou shalt love God above all others. Well, maybe if you're not a God believer, that doesn't affect you, but don't kill, don't steal, don't, you know what I mean? All
Sure.
good stuff. So I look at my faith as a core value that is so much more integral than the word faith, family, and work. So my work ties into my family because I want to have that
Sure.
connection. I want to have, and my faith will tell me, don't, better to, if you're not going to uplift people, why are you saying that? What is the purpose of your conversation? What is the purpose of your action? And again, I'm not perfect. I catch myself, but my core values and your core values, the only difference is I don't spell mine out, but I know that's all that matters. I know that they tie together, and then I practice that and I continue to move forward. But we're going to go on because we got so much other conversation.
I did just want to add in there, though, you
Sure.
said you're not perfect, and that's important for, I think, the audience members to give yourself a break, everybody. You're not perfect. Nobody's perfect.
No.
And just, give yourself some grace every once in a while. You got to, I messed up. I did a mistake. And, it's the same conversation when you're not feeling well. It's okay not to be okay, right? To give yourself a break. You're not perfect. You're not always okay. You're not always fine. You do have to figure out a ways to kind of work your way through it. I the other day I was getting treatment, and a nurse asked me, she goes, how are you feeling today? Well, I was, feeling kind of blue yesterday or whatever. And she goes, hey, it's okay to visit the blues. Just try not to move in permanently. Right. I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's we're people, and we should give other people grace, but you certainly need to start with yourself. Give yourself some grace. You're not perfect. Dwight's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And you audience members, I hope I'm not breaking news to you, but you're not perfect either. And it's okay.
You're right, though. Like, we could continue on and on. My goodness, we could have multiple episodes, but you don't have to be defined by your character building moments. That blue moment, you don't have to be defined by it. You can learn that you're triggered. You can learn to tell people, listen, I just had something happen. I can't deal with this right now. Obviously, there's going to be circumstances where you got to suck it up, put on a mask, and still deal with things. But more times than not, my character building moments, my blue moments, I embrace them. I acknowledge them, because to compartmentalize and push them away just harms me. It harms me more. Sure. Admit what I need to change. Sometimes I don't realize it. I've got so much going on in my head, Ray, that I won't until I have my awareness exercise at night when I do my gratefulness and gratitude, and I'll realize, oh my goodness, I talked to this person and I see, and they reacted a certain way, and I just ignored it. Right? Maybe they really needed to talk to me. Text, phone call, whatever. Hey, I noticed something going on yesterday. If I said or did something that brought that upon you, I want to apologize. That was not my intention. And
Mhm.
if it's something else and you needed somebody to listen to you, I'm sorry I failed on that front too. How can I help you? Right? Just am I 100% perfect at that? No, but I strive to be that person that's always empathetic, because
Yeah.
I am an empath. I've been told multiple times by empath coaches. I've gone through quizzes that I'm a person that picks up on other people, and but I don't necessarily, because of my learned experiences of life, know how to utilize it properly. Sometimes it's a weapon against me, right? It's just too much, right?
You know,
It's too much picking up everybody's stuff and what they're laying down and not knowing how to cope or communicate to distance myself, right?
and I'm still learning that aspect. I hadn't even heard of the word, the phrase emotional intelligence and EQ to about like 2002. And I did not have I did not have a very high EQ in 2002, and it's something that I am continually learning. It's an ongoing challenge for me, an ongoing growth is to understand that aspect, and it's an ongoing. I'm not going to say struggle, but it's a challenge. I'm learning, and I hope I'm getting a much better about it. But like I said, from my origin story, I kind of like lived in a little bubble, kind of felt that I was average, and like the average person, and but I was really kind of self-centered. It was like me, and like maybe this is all just a simulation, and everyone's an NPC out there, and they're what could you possibly be thinking if you're not talking to me or something like that. But I've learned that, and so learning from empaths like you and people with a higher degree of emotional intelligence, and understanding my feelings, and also understanding the feelings of others, and just being empathetic. I mean, empathy is not a bad thing.
Not at all, but you got
It's
to
a
learn.
great thing.
You got to understand how, though, if you're an empath,
Mm.
a true empath, I've had to start practicing to learn stuff because it eats away at you. Because you've got to realize, in this house, 4 daughters,
Mm-hmm.
a son,
Yeah.
and I'm a giant antenna, and I'm picking up what they're sending, and they're in a second floor bedroom, and or they come and get in a vehicle. I'm picking them up from school or taking them somewhere, and you can feel the icy chill, and it isn't towards you, but you pick up on it. And I was tired, exhausted all the time, and it makes so much sense now that people have helped me realize why, and why I'm a people pleaser,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I had to learn that the people pleasing is a good thing, but it has to be at an even keel
Yeah,
based on your
sure.
emotional intelligence. I was about the same time when I was introduced to emotional intelligence. We're going to continue on, but for the listeners and those watching, one thing he talked about Pittsburgh. One of my book publisher lives in Pittsburgh. I know the population's around 340,000 people. It's an amazing city. They don't have just the Steelers. They have the Pittsburgh Penguins,
That's right.
baby, headed by two of the most famous Canadians in history, Mario Lemieux and Sidney Crosby, and helped win a bunch of cups. That is a winning city, winning championship city. Yes, there's negative about every city, but you adding that stuff that I wasn't realizing about for the Pittsburgh Steelers just makes me love it even more. And I've never been there. So,
Yeah. You know, one of the
right.
one of the things we talk about in the book, is the city was fighting through, losing jobs, steel mills closing down, people leaving the city. In 1979, the Pittsburgh Pirates won the World Series, and then the Steelers won the Super Bowl in January, 3 months later, January 1980. They were the city of champions, and it was kind of, that was part of that civic pride coming out. It's like, yeah, we're losing jobs like crazy. We're economically depressed, but we're the city of champions. And when you in your time of need, they found heroes in their athletes. So it was a really rewarding book to I learned so much in researching for the book. It was fun to write it, and it's a book I'm
Connect.
proud
Yeah.
of. I'm proud of it.
I would be too. We have so much to talk about. Storytelling, right?
Hmm.
So you believe effective storytelling ties us and connects people and causes engagement. I love storytelling. It's something I've been working on for such a long time, but so many people are confused about storytelling, how to work on it to become a good storyteller. And, so basically, what led you to realize that effective storytelling helps connect people, and how has it shaped your life to where you are today and helped you even get through your trials and tribulations?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be a good storyteller, you also need to be a good story listener or reader or what have you. You just need to enjoy stories. And stories, I mean, as kids, we love stories. And the reason that we love stories is that they make some sort of they evoke some sort of emotional response in you, right? There's an emotional connection. And that's, I think, the key to storytelling. You can just convey information and data, and that will be received by somebody. But if you can make an emotional connection, evoke an emotional response, that all of a sudden you've got, a greater degree of engagement. And so, you can look at everybody experiences in their life. It's advertisements, and the advertisement that can hit you at an emotional level is the advertisement that you're going to recall the brand. You're going to be aware of the brand, and perhaps you might even make a purchase. You might not necessarily, but it's going to be at least memorable for you. There's a story that's been told in this newspaper ad, magazine ad, television commercial, radio commercial, what have you, that that hit you someplace within your core, right? And I for me as a storyteller, that was one of the kind of the constants I saw within my career pivots. I was always telling stories, and being a storyteller as a writer. I mean, that there's that obvious aspect for it, but the really rewarding piece, and we've talked about this before, Dwight, is having an opportunity to listen to other people's stories, like making a connection with my storytelling that prompts them to want to share their story, and it's been we have talked about this in the past, Dwight. The most rewarding experiences of my life have been connecting with cancer patients, cancer patient caregivers, and patient allies with the book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. I've had people reach out to me through social channels, just saying, like, I read your book, and then they ask me questions, or they tell me a bit about themselves, and interacting with these people who I would never have interacted with in any other way than through social media now, and our ability to really be a global village. I've interacted with readers from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Turkey, Egypt, and as you know, Dwight, because we were talking about this earlier, a group of women, myeloma patients from Iran. And we can drop aside religious differences and geopolitical differences and things like that, and just get down to human interactions that come from stories. Me telling my story and being open and honest about that, and then them coming back and sharing their story with me, which is such a privilege. Really, when you think about it, when people, particularly when they're talking about their health, trust you enough to reach out and ask questions and to share their story. It's such a rewarding process for me. And storytelling, I love hearing good stories. I love hearing your story, and lessons learned and living with purpose and intent. That's awesome. And that's a great degree of vulnerability that you shared, not through just your book, Dwight, but through, over 200 episodes of your podcast, right? This vulnerability and this learning, and, such a great way to be able to connect with people is, sharing your vulnerability. And it's hard to share your vulnerabilities, but then, in turn, being trusted enough where people share theirs with yours in those same stories.
Yeah, I love that. Storytelling, though, is something that people can do wrong. I know I read that in your, like, going through all your information, that was quite prevalent. You believe there's an effective way to tell stories too. Like, yes, people listening and watching, tell your stories, but there's ways to make your story more impactful and effective. And I know you believe that yourself. So what do people do wrong in regards to sharing their stories? How do they make it more effective?
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to say it's wrong for each their own.
Well, sorry, wrong term, I guess.
Yeah,
but
well,
anyway,
it's but to be more effective, the story is not about you. The story is about your intended audience and your target audience. Don't ever forget that. I've had conversations with other authors, and they talk about their community, and they'll create these online communities, but they'll ask the community to do things. And I'm like, you need to be careful of that, because as soon as you start thinking about the community as being your community, you've lost your community. the community is not about you. It's about them, the community. And so when you're telling a story, it's about your listener, your watcher, your viewer, your reader, whatever content and the method that you're educating, you're distributing your story, whatever channel it might be from. And I think we find this all the time, that the errors and the not effective storytelling through social media. It's about me, 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 me. It's I call them a me former. This is what I'm having for dinner. This is, it's all about me. It's me. It's me. And I'd rather be an informer, right? Instead of a me former, where I'm telling you all about me. Let's inform, let's educate, let's entertain, or whatever. But keep your audience in mind. They're the customer, and the customer always comes first. It's always right. If you can kind of get off of yourself and be there with the right intent in mind, and that is to somehow better your audience through your story, whether they need to be educated or informed or entertained or what have you, whatever the objective might be. It still needs, the effectiveness of your storytelling is seen from their perception and their eyes, their ears.
Well, when you're telling stories, wouldn't you say it's also prevalent? Obviously, if I'm doing a blurb on social media, I can't really look at my audience and say, well, this is what I'm viewing or what I'm seeing. But when you're telling stories to an individual or a group of people, it's back to what we talked about before. It's important, in my opinion, I want to see what your opinion is, that we stay connected to what we're seeing, right? Be a student of human behavior, and what's their body language like when you're telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
You can
Sure.
tell when somebody, if you're telling a story to one or a group, you can tell this connection. If you're connected to who you're talking to and making it about them, not you, like you said, you can tell. And I know when I was telling stories, I also know I try to read the group or know a little bit about what I'm talking about, even if it's just where I'm thrust into a situation and, hey, Dwight, tell them this story. I look at I want to, okay, I'll do that. Ask a few questions, because should it be a long story? Should it be a short story? Am I going to be puking on them? Am I going to lose people?
Yeah.
Maybe you lose a couple, but the person you really wanted to talk to the story about, they're more important in engagement than the people around, but the people around still have a right to be addressed in the sense that they're present in the conversation. So I still look at effectively telling the story to the person asking it, but knowing if there's a group of people around me that are, what's the word I'm looking for? They've all come over and they've all decided they want to be part of that little conversation or listening to it, that I had to be cognizant of them too. So being an active storyteller takes more work than people realize. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but somebody that's active at always being a good storyteller, like yourself and myself, working with clients, exposing our inner vulnerabilities, we need to understand how is it affecting. And I find the best way to do it is through our ears and our eyes. Listen, watch, right? Watch how they're acting. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you give a great examples, this real-time feedback, and you've got a vast amount of experience, Dwight, in public speaking, right? And you can look at your audience and collect some feedback. It's like, are people looking at you, for example? That's a bit of feedback that you can give. Are they smiling? Are they nodding along? Are they shaking their head this way? Or they have their arms across them and very defensive? All these are things that you can, you have real-time metrics in a way of thinking, of collecting feedback on how your story is coming across, and you can make adjustments. And I think from a marketing perspective, me being a content marketer, you need to look at your metrics and your analytics, and see how your audience is engaging, and dig down on that, because it's so easy, particularly with digital marketing. It's so easy to make a change based on data. You see a data, it's like, let's go and change this. Let's add a different keyword in here. Let's change this blog post or what have you. It's not like we printed off, 10,000 copies of the Encyclopedia Britannica back in the days when we were kids, right? No, this is all digital, and we can go into, WordPress or whatever the site might be built on and change something super fast. Sometimes you have that luxury. You certainly have that luxury in, like in public speaking, to be able to ingest this information. Or you got to not, forget, standing on stage, because not everybody in the audience does that. But there's times you're just going to be speaking with people, and some examples you've given so far in our conversation today, Dwight. Sometimes it's one or two people. Sometimes there's people coming into the conversation, or maybe people filtering away from the conversation. But just being like you said, eyes and ears. How is your story being resonated? And also ask. Again, you can look at somebody that maybe isn't looking at you, isn't giving you direct eye-to-eye contact. You might value direct eye-to-eye contact, but they might value indirect eye-to-eye contact. But asking questions and checking where they are, it's always always a good idea. In conversations and telling stories and the like, and just checking it to see, do they understand what you're saying? Like, what's your understanding of what I just said? And listen to them paraphrase back what you just said. That lets you know if, you're on target, or if maybe you need to course correct and get back on target, because my objective is to do this. And it seems like there's a disconnect at this point in time. Does that make sense, Dwight?
Oh, well, absolutely. Absolutely. And asking good questions. And people go, what's the difference between a bad question and a good question? A bad question shouldn't be asked. Right? A good question is something that's been thoughtful, and you can be a critical thinker. You can develop your mindset over time where you can literally analyze a situation. You can think to yourself, if I ask that question, does it serve? Does it harm? Oh, hey, like you said, indirect connection. I look at people, if they're turned sideways and they're kind of leaned in, I ain't asking them if they're engaged. They're engaged. They just don't want to look at me, because maybe they're that person that was in the classroom that didn't want to, put their hand up. They didn't want to be recognized by the teacher. We don't know, like you said earlier, where they're at in their journey of life. We don't know what's going on behind the closed doors of their lives. But if I look over and I see Ray leaning over and he's listening, but he's not looking, right? It's back to that.
Yeah.
Am I watching? Right? And you're right. I can ask that person, are you getting what I'm putting down? I don't have to say it necessarily that way, but I could, depending on their sense of humor, I will, because I like joke. I'm a jokester. I like teasing people in a friendly way, not in a hurtful way, right? Obviously. And yeah, storytelling to me has been something I continue to work on. I did it the harsh way, though, to learn how to do it. I got challenged by a friend on March the 1st, 2020. I was challenged just before the pandemic lockdown to do 30 days of videos. I thought he said live videos, so I did them live, right? 837 days later, I quit. I never missed a live video. There's 500 and some up on YouTube, on IGT, Instagram, there's all of them, right? Facebook, you can go back to my videos. And when I look at my first ones, Ray, I'm just like, deer caught in the headlights. I'm honest. I used to be that person that would walk across the road and avoid cameras. When I spoke, I was speaking to a captive audience in the financial industry. So there might be 40, 50, 100, 1,000 people in the room. It was captive. So I didn't really feel nervous, because I was going up and blah, 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 blah. Here's a PowerPoint, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't really speaking. It wasn't really storytelling. And I remember the first time I went up on stage, where I actually connected to my story. And it's actually on my YouTube channel. For those wanting to watch, they can go to my website, giveaheck.com, and you can watch a 3-minute reel of it encapsulated, or the full, just shy of 14-minute speech that I did in Salt Lake City. And I got emotional. That's when I knew I was beyond being a captive speaker, and now as a storyteller speaker. I got emotional. And the audience got emotional, and the amount of people that I got 3 people to give. Well, actually, I didn't. The company I hired to film me speaking got 3 testimonials from people, and I got reached out from so many people in the audience. But that's when, I'm not making this about me, but I want people to understand, that's when I truly connected to storytelling. It was just, I had that aha moment where my emotional IQ, my mental state of mind, everything about me, my soul, everything just came together in that 13 and a half minutes. And I didn't realize until I heard from others, because self-doubt, right?
Yeah.
sabotage ourselves, imposter syndrome, until other people started telling me that I really was connected to my story and that how much my story could help other people, that vulnerability. And I focused on that one conversation because that was the pivoting point of my life and storytelling and realizing how I need to be connected.
And one thing that we haven't talked about, but I'll add on to the audience members, that authenticity, the
Oh,
authentic
yes.
light, comes out because we can spot people when they're not being authentic, and that affects the storytelling as well. But you being authentic, you being vulnerable, you being emotional, and making that emotional connection. I mean, that's success. You effectively communicated your story to an audience, and they in turn, perpetuated that story by sharing their stories with you and
Oh,
sharing,
yeah.
providing you feedback. So yeah, it's but being authentic, and I don't want to say fearless because there is some fear in being authentic,
Oh,
but
I
overcoming,
was scared, to
yeah,
be
overcoming
honest with
that
you.
fear to be authentic and knowing that the authenticity, that's that trumps all. Be authentic and overcome yourself. Don't try to be a charlatan, and change yourself, because we kind of see through that pretty quickly.
Absolutely. So, anyway, a great conversation. We're still, you got a few more minutes. I got a couple more
I
questions and
do.
we'll wrap up the show. I really want to talk about your books. And here's why, right? To remind the audience, you've authored 3 books, right? Um, Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, Me, Myself, and Multiple Myeloma, Revenue Orchestration, and Today's New Era of B2B Sales and Marketing. And then now your latest book that's coming out today, the release of this podcast, the Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. I know myself writing one book. Oh, there's the book. For those watching, that's a nice cover. I like
Thank
that.
you so much.
Yes.
You know how difficult it is to make
Oh
a
my
cover.
God. I had 40 some different covers the publisher came back with. And then I said, change this, change that. And that cover of my book now is a person, an individual, a man walking upstairs going through a keyhole, right?
Huh?
That book, that cover was a culmination of a bunch of other ones.
Okay.
And I put this in there, try this, try that.
Huh?
I think they wanted to choke me. And my buddy Mike was like, we'll get it. We'll get it. We're going to find the perfect one. And that wasn't the one they wanted me to choose, but it's the one that resonated with me,
Yeah.
my genuine Dwight, right?
Yeah.
My genuine self of give a heck and being my last name and stuff. But I found writing my book very cathartic, very healing. What of your books, like through the process, did you find, like from writing your first one to even your latest one, different cathartic moments of realization, of patting yourself on the back for things that you didn't give yourself credit for, or maybe kicked yourself in the pants for things that you didn't realize were a challenge that you needed to address?
Yeah, the most cathartic book of mine is the second book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, because it's personal. It's and it was unveiling the veil. And you and I have talked extensively in the past. For the audience members, when I had lived a life of good health up until the day I was diagnosed, and I felt good when I was diagnosed. It wasn't like I was sick, right? And so it was. It was in a way kind of difficult to come to terms with, right? And I immediately went to a cancer patient group. I had never been to a group of anything before, and so I didn't know how to, I didn't even know what to expect. I was like, you know what, let's give it a try, and there's so many brave cancer warriors in that group that lended a hand and helped me, become a cancer patient. As weird as that sound, but they helped me in a way that made an impact, right? And I made a decision soon thereafter is I want to be someone like that. I want to be helpful for other patients, caregivers, and allies. When I'm feeling good, if I can lend a helping hand to somebody and pull them forward to where they want to be, to where they need to be, I want to be that guy. I made that conscious decision. How do I want to be remembered, Dwight? What type of role model do I want to be to my children and my family and my friends? How am I going to respond to this obstacle and this challenge in my life? And one of the things, I became a fundraiser for cancer organizations that benefit patients, in the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation being one of them, but also a complementary healings thing that was in the Bay Area where I lived at the time upon diagnosis. And I loved working with those groups and raising awareness and raising funds, right? And I thought, what's the best way that I can scale? I had the privilege, Dwight, of being interviewed, based on my social media presence and other things. I had the privilege of being interviewed by several different media outlets soon after my diagnosis. And that was cool. And I had people reaching out to me through social media. It's like, hey, I read this article, I saw this video, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, how can I scale that? Because those were great interactions I was having on a one-to-one basis, but how could I do instead of one-to-one, a one-to-many? And that's where the idea for the book came about. It's like, maybe I can tell my story, and this can be to the community from a person in the community, right? I'm a patient. I want to write it for other patients, their caregivers and allies. But, more important than that, I want it to benefit the community as well, not just as a resource, but financially. So, all of my net writers proceeds from me, myself, and my multiple myeloma get donated to the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, the MMRF. And so it was important for me to write this book, to be, from the community, to the community, for the community. But, it needed to be authentic, and it needed to be the truth. And, it's about my health. But a lot of people like to protect their health and, don't talk about it. It's something that's in the United States is legally protected and can't be discriminated against and the like. But, my readers needed to see it all, right? And I needed to open up. And it was really kind of cathartic for me to really understand, where I was with my relationship with cancer. I know that sounds kind of like a weird thing to say, but like in the book, I explore the difference between a journey with cancer and a fight against cancer. Some people have journeys, some people have fights. For me, I have a fight against cancer, and it's not for everybody. Some people have journeys, and I understand it. The difference there, vernacularly speaking, when you think of fights, you tend to think of winners and losers. And, I go into the infusion center 3 weeks out of 4 and look at a bunch of patients in infusion chairs. And there's not a single loser in the bunch. Those are some brave sons of guns, right? And they are warriors. And I have a great deal of respect and admiration for each and every one of them. But for me, I get out of bed, motivated and inspired by thinking about a fight with cancer instead of a journey. Other people have journeys. Those are things that I explore in the book. I explore values. I went through a stem cell transplant and the chemotherapy that was associated with that, and I wanted to give people a preview of that. This is what my experiences would be. Maybe you might experience the same type of thing. Bone marrow biopsies. Another thing that revisited, not particularly fun for those of you out there in the audience, not to be considered recreational. They are painful experiences, but I needed to share that with people because that's a reality of being a blood cancer patient. You're going to need a bone marrow biopsy because you don't really know what's going on till you take a look at that. Having listened to you before, Dwight, I know that you asked, like, are there any things that you want to to say, kind of like at the last moment, and I'm going to take that opportunity to do it now instead of the last moment.
Sure.
As part of the book, I do talk about so many people reached out to me. It's like, what can I do for you? And I told them, well, I think I got it covered. I don't think you need to do anything for me right now. But I kept getting asked that all the time. And then when I was speaking publicly, particularly in fundraising things, I realized, there are 4 things that you can do for me, people. These are the things you can do for me. And the first thing you can do is go see your doctor at least annually and make sure you have a complete blood workup. Why is that important? I was 54 years old. I felt fine. The only reason I started to get diagnosed is I had a routine blood test that came back that showed that I was slightly anemic. So, well, trying to confirm that test, it was confirmed. I was slightly anemic. Okay, let's go more sophisticated tests to understand why. What's the root cause of your anemia? Turned out 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous.
Wow.
And I felt fine. I was, at the time, I was a road cyclist, and my performance metrics on the bicycle, I was a beast. At 54, they were every bit as good as they were when I was 49. I felt fine. And in hindsight, yeah, maybe I was a little fatigued, but come on, give me a break. It's 54 years old, full-time job, married with 2 kids in expensive private universities. I think I deserved to be
A
a
little
little
bit of
bit.
grace.
Yeah. So, number one, go see your doctor annually. Number two is mitigate your twos. I call them the twos, and you already know what the twos are. You don't need to go to a doctor. You smoke too much, you drink too much, you exercise too little, you eat too few fruits and vegetables, and so forth. We all have risk factors. I'm not saying don't live, just mitigate your risk factors. Third thing you can do for me is if you know anybody undergoing a serious chronic health issue, reach out to them. They're going to appreciate it. It is difficult to go through a chronic health issue, a serious one. Just mail alone. I mean, we are inundated with mail here in the United States with insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, care practitioners. Just the mail alone is staggering. There is a lot to do. If you know anybody that's doing it, particularly on their own, by themselves, reach out to them. They will appreciate the help. And the fourth thing is find your passion, your cause, and you'll know what it is because it will connect with you emotionally and support it with your time and or your money, because we're all in this together, and together we are stronger than we know. Those are the four things you can do for me. But one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about with you is that first one: go see your doctor, people. I consider myself to be early detection, even though 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous. A lot of multiple myeloma patients are diagnosed because of unexplainable bone fractures. They'll get up in the morning out of bed, take a couple of steps, and suffer multiple compression fractures of the vertebrae. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. Why is that? It's because the bone marrow, the cancer in the bone marrow had gone in and provided, gotten lesions on the bone. I didn't have any bone lesions, despite the fact that 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous. But if it hadn't been for that routine CBC coming back anemic, I would have been on the route to having a very late detection. And when it comes to health, early detection is always better than anything late, right?
It's great advice. It's great advice. So, like, my friend got diagnosed and 5.5 months later was gone. He literally, within about 60 days, had his kidneys shut down. So between treatments and going back and forth, they're giving him chemo, but yet he's on dialysis because both his kidneys shut down. Yeah. And then and what does it do? What did the dialysis do? It takes the chemo out of your system, right? And there was so many other details I don't quite understand, but I think early detection would have been good, right? Yeah. I don't know if he had gotten his physical recently. It wasn't a conversation that we had, but we should have had.
Well,
right. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
like, have that conversation. Remind people. Yeah. I remind my friends all the time to get their yearly physical.
Yeah, it's not convenient. But it's an investment in yourself. Nobody likes the needle stick. Yeah, I get it, but it's an investment in yourself. And Dwight, what better investment can you make? You're a finance guy. What better investment can you make than an investment in yourself? It's important. Go see your doctor. Get your blood work up. It's just part of you. It's what you need to do. Do it.
Absolutely, because you can't. The rest of the world can't. Your family and friends and everybody else, your clients, can't rely on somebody that's dead. So, take care of your health first and foremost. I wish we had more time. I tell you about, I got a new doctor after 37 years, and something they discovered about my health, which was, I got tested for, and it wasn't as bad as they thought, but yet it's still bad enough that had I not been consistently getting physicals, it would have just gotten worse and taken more to fix or possibly not be able to be fixed in my health. And, physicals are good. I don't mind getting a physical. I've been getting them since my 43, 45. I told my doctor, there's a lot of doctors, you don't have to worry about till you're older. No, get them. Yeah. I don't care how old you are, woman, man, get them. Yeah. The doctor will not turn you down, right? Unfortunately, we have universal health care that pays for all that stuff. You don't, which kind of sucks, right? So hopefully the people that are listening in places where you don't have universal health care, you can afford to get it done every year. But it really isn't an expense. It's an investment in your long-term existence on this planet.
Yeah, and it's a better planet having you all in it. So take care of yourself.
So last thing we're going to discuss is your new book, Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. How did this come about, right? I just as a side note, I off-road rallied for many years in this country till we had a really bad accident. I was a co-driver with my brother-in-law. I was a driver. We're in the Rocky Mountains and went off the side of a mountain. Long story short, car was destroyed. I was out of work for 3 months. I punched both my legs to the floorboards. That's how hard we hit a tree coming down the mountain surface. So I understand racing, not to the extent of the Indy 500. I'm familiar with the Indy 500 is, but I was a participant in the racing world and can really appreciate it. So I was excited to find out why this book, who guided you to this, or was it something you always wanted to do?
I like talking about this because here in the States, we have this program in schools called Scholastic America. And there's these thin catalogs, like 8.5, when I was a kid, 8.5 by 11, and tissue paper thin paper, right? And inside there are all these books, and they're usually, a couple of years old. And the teacher passes it around the classroom. You're like, oh, this is a book I want. And then you go home and beg your parents for some money, or you break open your piggy bank. And years ago, I was like, I don't know, it was probably 1973, 1974, probably around 1973. Let's call me 9 years old, third grade, and I got this book. This is a reprint. The book that I bought was called The Indy 500 30 Days in May by a writer in Indiana named Hal Higdon. And it was a chronicle of the 1970 Indy 500. And as a 9-year-old in the early 70s, reading about these guys, racing has always been dangerous, but it was pretty dangerous back in the 70s. Lots of traumatic injuries through crashes and fatalities were not uncommon at all, unfortunately. And these racing drivers were sort of like astronauts in a way, right? And this book just captured my attention as a young reader. I read that book multiple times a year for multiple years, and I was just fascinated. It ignited a passion in me in the event. And like I said, this book chronicled the 1970 Indy 500 from the day before the track opened for practice all through the month of May and the race on May 30th. And throughout the years, I thought, I would love to, as an homage to that book, I like to update it and chronicle a more modern race, and maybe I can ignite the passion in a kid someplace for the event and for the sport. And going back to our conversation earlier today, Dwight, if not now, when? So, my book, the book that comes out the day that this podcast comes out, it's called The Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. It starts with the last 2 laps of the 2023 Indy 500, and then goes through the entire year and culminates with the victory banquet the day after the 2024 Indy 500. So I try to tell the stories, the history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the history of the people that are involved in the event, and also, the current events that happen, kind of like a diary leading up to the race, because it really is a year-long effort. When the Indy 500 ends, while there's more races in the season that take place, there's still the attention of the teams and the drivers are, well, what about next year? And really, in a way speaking, a lot of the races that happen after the Indy 500 in the season are really just a prelude to the Indy 500 for next season. There's one race to win. The Indy 500 is a career maker for everybody involved. To win that race, it's more important than winning the season championship. It's more important than winning any other race on the
ground. It's the de facto standard. It's the goal.
Yeah, and it's it's my homage to Hal Higdon and his book. That book ignited a passion in me that hasn't been put out yet. I'm a ticket holder. You'll see me in the Paddock Penthouse, section 23, rows double C and double B, seats 13 and 14 each row. So stop by, say hi that last Sunday in May.
Sweet. That's incredible. The things that we look back at our lives and the things that back to your origin, what touched you, right? Our origin's always ongoing. Our living legacy is created on the daily. It's not something we look at when we're about to die. Our living legacy is in session. We're creating it. And it's interesting how you said you read that book and then you go and you want to do an homage to the person that wrote the other book, and you want to make your thoughts and people understand the journey, right, from the end of one to the start of the other, and it's just amazing. I can imagine you're going to have the NASCAR fans; they're just going to be elated to have this book, right?
Well, IndyCar
or IndyCar, pardon me,
not hopefully the NASCAR fans will like it too. And
Wrong
maybe
word.
they'll,
Sorry.
yeah, maybe they'll invite me to write a book on the Daytona 500 or something like that.
Did you know that we used to have Indy in Canada? We still do in Toronto.
I've been to
Did
IndyCar
you?
races in Canada.
You never came to Edmonton though. We had them here for many years.
I did not go to the Edmonton one. That was out in the airport, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
Now they're building houses out there. They had it out there for 5 years, 4 or 5
yeah,
years. Yeah, it
I,
was.
I was.
I went to the first one. It was amazing. I didn't go to the ones after because it was just raising young kids and stuff. It was tough. I took my son. The girls didn't want to go. I had to have them on my shoulder because they didn't have the best
Mhm,
seats
yeah.
because it literally sold out. I waited too long to get tickets. Right.
You
But
Canadians have a very rich. You love your motorsports, and you have a very rich tradition in them. I used to go to the Vancouver IndyCar race. That was great. As you know, I've been to the Montreal Formula One race on multiple occasions.
yeah,
But all through, you've got great tracks up there, most part, and the history of people like Jacques Villeneuve and his father Gilles Villeneuve. You Canadians do like your motorsport,
oh,
not as much as
absolutely.
hockey, but you do love your motorsport.
Well, hockey is like, well, people say it's a religion. I don't know if I consider it a religion. I consider it to be a passion that
Mm.
drives a community to be connected and closer and shut out the noise of all the wars and politics and everything else. Yes, there's wars within hockey and politics, but that's different, a different type of politics and war of teams competing. But you look at the end of last night's game, and you look at the players that know one another on the ice that have played with LA or vice versa. Like we had one player change over to LA and one come to Edmonton this past season. And you look at their in between plays or whatever, they're talking about that. They're not shit talking one another. They're just, hey, how's it going? Once that puck drops, so man, all friendships are off the table.
It is. All friendships are off, but as a longtime hockey player, in fact, I got a puck sitting here on my desk. As a longtime hockey player, there's a great mutual respect from hockey player to hockey player because
Absolutely.
the sport is difficult. It is so incredibly hard. It's a sport of frustration. It's a sport that to be any good at, you have to have passion and heart. Because if you can turn a 50-50 puck into a 55-45 puck, you have a really good chance of winning that game. And that's all effort. And how hard hockey is, you could play for about 35, 40 seconds on a forward line. If you're on a defender, you can maybe play a little bit longer on a shift. And then you have to get off the ice because you are beat. And it's such a difficult sport. But the one thing, when the puck drops, there are no friends. But at the end of it, there's this mutual respect, and particularly in the NHL at the end of a playoff series, there's nothing like playoff hockey. Nothing's more intense than mine. But the handshake lines afterwards, where you just the display of mutual respect, winner, loser, doesn't matter. It's that you're a player and you played the right way. So
Yeah,
a lot of respect.
hockey's, as far as I'm concerned, is the most elite, difficult sport on the planet.
Oh yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. You can look at, I don't care what it is, rugby, I don't care what it is, soccer, football. You tell me you slap on a couple razor blades and you go out there and you're stuck in a power play mode like last night where, some of these players are on the ice trying to kill a power play. They're on that ice for 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes of most of the intense skating, physical interaction, being zoned in on your own zone and not being able to switch out your players. And you know what I mean? Like it is intense.
Yeah.
It's an amazing sport. But anyway, we digress. So the book itself is something you wanted to write, and I apologize to those. I know there's a difference between NASCAR and Indy. I just got word salad. I call it word salad. Everything just got kind of mixed up in my head. Have you ever tried racing yourself?
I have not at a high level go-karting, and
That's fun.
That's a lot of fun. But never like I would. I just thought about this the other night. Ironically, it's like I know I'm 61 years old, but I wonder if I could talk somebody into letting me tool around in a sprint car or a midget, just on like a little bullring oval. I would love to do that. I still think some of the best Friday nights I've ever had is just hanging out with some friends and family, watching sprint cars and midget cars, at the local track. That's a lot
We've
of fun for
we've
me.
we've got a bunch of local tracks. We got drag strip. We've got all this stuff. We got dirt track. We've got all that stuff around here too. It's fun. I even like when you go to the ones where they call them absolute annihilation, and they have crash. They have smash up derbies where
Yeah.
they're crashing the cars, or they take a jet car and they take a van and they melt it with the jet, right? Because they have these jet powered cars that have jet engines on them, and I've watched them where they've elevated cars like 8, 10 stories off the ground, and they drop them, and you know what I mean, just
Yeah.
fun,
There's a
right?
place here in Southern California. I don't know if they still hold the event. I think they do, but it's a takeoff on the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in
Oh
France.
yeah.
It's the 24 Hours of Lemons. And so they have a price limit on how much you can spend on your car. And so basically they're junkers that you probably spend more on tires than on the car. And it's a 24-hour race. And I'm like, I wonder if I could get three buddies or so to build out like an old Chevrolet Z24 or something like that, put some tires on it and go out and see how many of these 24 hours we could actually race it.
That's awesome. We could go on and on, but this is the last absolute question. Ray, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Yeah, it's for me, it's that sense of inner peace that I've spoken about before, and satisfaction, and it's about living a life well lived. And I think that for most people, the life well lived is that life, as you know about, Dwight, with intent and purpose. And for me, my intent and purpose, and what helped develop that for me was approaching an obstacle with a growth mindset. So let's take a step back, and that we don't know everything. So how can we go out and learn and discover more about ourselves, right? And then it was that, because of that growth mindset, stumbling back to this timeline exercise I'd done before, and then really spending time introspectively thinking about it. Okay, I think I take time for granted. How does that manifest itself in my life? Taking people and relationships for granted. If I want to live a life with purpose and intent, I want to focus on the things that matter most to me and the people that matter most to me. And if I can do that, I am going to have that sense of inner peace, that sense of self-satisfaction. So, for you people out there, living with purpose and intent, you're gonna feel better. The hard part is, that's not the hard part. The hard part is finding out what your purpose and intent is, right? So take that introspective journey. Don't be afraid to do it, and you'll find it to be so rewarding. But take that introspective journey. Find out what your values are. Find out what are the things that are most important to you. What is your purpose? What is your intent? Why are you here? For you? And there's only one answer, and you have that right answer inside of you. But discover that right answer, and then take advantage of the day, each and every day. Live your best life and be as happy as you can be. That's what I want people to get.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of reflection, awareness, and being willing to be vulnerable to yourself and others around you, not necessarily receive criticism, but receive that conversation when you bring up something and you ask for advice, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you didn't, and somebody communicates back something that kind of makes you go, ooh, I don't know about that. It's not necessarily that they're criticizing you, they're giving you their pink fuzzy glass version of what they see or have heard from you, or what they just heard from you at that moment. And don't take it personal.
Yeah.
Look at it as a growth experience. Now, if it's offensive and it's morally apprehensive, that's completely different. I'm talking about just a normal conversation where somebody is giving you their insight as to what you're saying. Maybe you're telling a story about something else, and their insight is about that. Don't take
Yeah.
it personal. Just listen.
I think
Right?
I like to think of that as intent. What is the other person's intent? Do they have good intentions, or is it just to make them feel
Yeah.
better? And if they're providing you data, feedback with good intent, then that's a gift. It's that is another gift in and of itself. It's just good, honest feedback with the intent to help you. Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult. You learn that in your professional career when you get feedback for coaching and development. But even athletically, sometimes you don't like to hear what the coach has to say, but with the intent to make you better. Try to receive that as the gift that it is, because now you've got some opportunities for improvement. Let's get to it. Yeah,
Absolutely. They say success leaves clues, so does conversation, right? Conversation leaves clues, body language leaves clues, right? Tonality leaves clues. We just need to be aware and be open and live intentfully. Absolutely. I totally believe in purposeful living and intentful life. All right.
absolutely.
That's why I wrote my book and cried many times having to go through chapters and send it off to an editor. And then, you know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. I'm going to live today for today, and I'm going to keep on climbing until the day I take my last breath. And I know you are too. We are two warriors. We have a superpower that most people don't believe is a superpower, but tenacity. Being tenacious is a superpower, wanting to grow, wanting to change. And tenacity can be a bad thing too, but tenacity can also be good, wielded in the hands of a good person like yourself. And I will label myself as a decent human being too, that we're always on the climb to change and grow. You wouldn't write 4 books if you weren't. Especially writing books with what you're going through. Your challenges are still being treated and stuff. And I wish you best of luck. Obviously, you're a warrior. You're continuing to battle and stay healthy for an incurable disease, one that takes people usually well before where you're at. So realizing that people that are sick, people that are listening, watching, if you're sick, your most powerful tool is your mind. Your most powerful tool is your attitude, your emotional center, who you're talking to. Like you said, I loved how you put that in. And I don't know why I didn't bring that up sooner when you said that you became or were taught how to be a cancer person, like a person suffering from cancer, right? How to be a cancer survivor. How great is that? That may sound terrible, but how great is that you had a community that would teach you that?
Yeah. And I'm grateful for that community, and I want to be part of that. Like I said, if I can help any of you listening, those of you have lived through this entire conversation and stuck around to the end. If there is ever anything I can do for each and every one of you, reach out to me. You can hit me at all the social media platforms. It's my name, Ray Hartjen. You can hit me on my website, which is rayhartjen.com. And my email address is rayhartjen@gmail.com. If there is ever anything I can do for you, please reach out. I say that sincerely. My phone number is in the book. And I will gladly take your call. I want to be of service because so many people have been of service to me. And together, like I said before, we are stronger than we know. And we all get something, and it takes a global village. So let's do this together.
Thank you so much, Ray. For those that are new to the show, go to giveaheck.com, go to the Top Hit Podcast. You will see a picture of Ray, and you will see detailed show notes, which will show all his social media links, his website. So if you're driving, you don't have to pull over, right? You don't have to rewind. Well, actually, you do have to rewind. This was a great episode. Rewind. Listen to it, watch it again.
Listen to it again.
Yeah. So you'll find all that information along with chapter summaries and an unedited full transcript of the show as well. So, at the end of the day, just go check it out. You don't have to remember Ray's last name. You don't have to remember nothing. You just got to remember, give a heck. Right? You want to live life on purpose and not by accident. Tune into the show, share it with your friends and family. It helps the algorithm share it to more people as well. I do this as a passion project, those listening and watching, and to tell Ray that too. This is not a monetary thing for me whatsoever. I just want to showcase and support those out there that have been marginalized or have been in the shadows. Not that Ray has been, but just to highlight the greatness of people and what they go through, and they still continue to climb. How many of you would have an incurable cancer diagnosis and would still be going out there to help the masses? would be supporting financially by doing charitable work. The list goes on. Just ask yourself those questions. I may be sick, but I'm not dead yet. What can you do? What can you do to help others climb? And I imagine you feed off that energy too. As one last comment.
Yeah, and we appreciate your audience, Dwight. Thanks for doing what you do. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having me on the show. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm thankful.
Yeah, and congratulations to those listening to this on the 6th for buying the book.
Yeah.
Right? And any of your books, it's just,
they're all good.
Yeah. I would imagine they'd be spectacular, better than good. But anyway, we've already asked the closing comments. I'm going to wrap up the show. Thanks again, Ray.
Thanks.
You bet. Thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Ray. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck. Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.